Hey, we love talking to people on the wireless that are well known in some way, shape or form. And this fella, he covers about 5 or 6 different areas. So we'll introduce him just as Russel Howcroft. Good morning, Russel.
Good morning, Neil. Good day, Rob. Nice to talk to you both.
Good to have you.
It's a bit weird hearing you on the, sort of roles reversed. We had that when we spoke to Ross a few times.
Well, it's nice to be on. Two blokes talking.
Two blokes chatting, if you don't mind.
Okay, well, three blokes.
Three blokes chatting today.
And I hope you appreciated we had Artificial. Russ is the man who suggested that Artificial put that into Spotify, and it's now available on Spotify.
Yeah, as it should be. Russell, you're normally used to talking to about 2 million people of a morning. You'll be talking to 17 this morning. Does that alter the way you deal with us?
Not at all. As you both know, the secret is just to, chat and hopefully you say something that's, half amusing or interesting or, got energy. Well, and you've spoken to Ross, I know, and as you both know, and I'm sure that listeners know, Ross is something of a radio genius. Well, in fact, not just a radio genius, let's just say genius.
Yes.
But he's done it for a long time, and a lot of people are attracted to what he's got to say. It's very good.
Yeah, and I've had the good fortune to interview him probably 5 or 6 times now. And as you say, it's not an interview, it's a chat. And we had our 100th show a couple of years ago where he and Ian Cover, you'd know as the Oracle of Barwon Heads, good morning Ian, he'll be listening, came in as our guests. And Rob and I just sat back for 50 minutes and let them take over.
Well, that doesn't surprise me.
Hey, now I do need to point this out because I've been working on this for a while. Last week, our regional roundup guest's name was Russell, and he had 2 L's in his name.
Oh, yeah.
This is Russell with 1 L in his name. Our Christmas show's coming. You know what's happening, don't you? No L.
Go. Well done.
Hey?
Well, the 1 L is interesting, isn't it? Because I think people think that I did that.
Oh, like Danny Minogue did with the 2 eyes.
Yeah, all that, and there was Simon Reynolds for his 2 eyes, who was a great, very successful ad guy. And,
yes.
And Todd's got 2 Ds, of course. Todd Sampson on the groin. No, I didn't do that. My father, from the day dot, my initial, from day one, my father said, spell it with 1 L. He had an artistic sensibility, my old man. He was a good artist, actually. He had an artistic sensibility, and he just said it looks better, and it is superfluous as well, of course, the second L, and so I mean, that's what it's on the birth. That is what is on the birth certificate. That's how I've always spelt it, and it's not because I've been affected.
Well, I grew up with a girl whose name was Nolene, and it was Nolleen. And when her father was asked why because in those days, you went and registered the name and all that sort of stuff, he may have, to use a term that's often used on your program, over-refreshed and couldn't remember how to spell it and did it phonetically.
I know.
Yeah. Hey, so let's get, part of the reason for the chat is just to take us back and learn a bit about Russel Howcroft. And, suddenly you popped up on our TV screens and radios, but there's a lot that goes on before that. You've obviously been advertising. Where did all that start?
Well, it started at, the first job actually was at the Melbourne Times newspaper, which was a local paper for Fitzroy, Collingwood, Carlton. And I worked with a couple of others there. One of the gentlemen there was literally, his name was Glenn Rowan, which was also, he was the editor. And that was while I was studying the marketing degree, sort of arts and marketing actually. And then, and at the Melbourne Times, I just sort of learnt about chasing down advertising, really. I did advertising selling, wrote advertising, wrote articles. That was a great apprenticeship of sorts. And then while I was doing the degree, I had a week's work experience at an agency, McCann Erickson. And McCann Erickson, very famous, global, very powerful advertising agency. Not as famous and powerful as they once were now, but that's really the case for all advertising agencies. But very powerful at the time, very significant business. I had a week's work experience. And at the end of the week, they said, can you stay? Like to stay, here's a contract. So I went from having work experience to actually being full-time employed and finished my degree whilst being full-time employed. So that got me going. And I immediately loved the ad game, and still do. It's a really wonderful culture. The advertising industry's got a great culture. Sort of creativity and business and deals and dealing with various media companies and clients, and I loved it. And at that time, and it's probably still the case now, the view was, if you don't work in London, you're nobody.
Yep.
Right? In the ad game. And so I went over to London and literally walked the streets. I had a few, I suppose, introductions. No, I did have some introductions to some very, very significant agencies. And you know what? I finished up working at one of the best in the world. Lots of luck involved in that. And I stayed there for a long time, did very well. And that really fueled the fire, the advertising fire. It was a bit of a problem because once you'd worked at that place, it was called Low Howard Spink. Once you'd worked there, everything else was not quite as good. So,
and you're going to struggle with this at 5:30 on Monday morning, having been on the Two Blokes Chatting radio show, to then go back and have to do what you do on a Monday morning.
Well,
I think you'll manage.
Yeah. When I was at Channel 10, I was in charge of the Melbourne and the network for Channel 10. I was on the executive team of 10, reporting into the CEO. I had a very short period as the CEO, like I was, stand-in, interim, whatever you call it. And so I had a taste of being the CEO of a TV station, and then I had to go back to being, the one below the CEO.
Yeah, that's no fun.
We're going backwards.
Yeah.
Once you have a taste of it, it fuels the fire, fuels ambition. So I've done telly, and interestingly, I was the first chief creative officer of PwC.
Okay.
Which I actually, again, really enjoyed. Those organisations, if you haven't been in one of those organisations, it's hard to understand them. I've been in PwC for 4 or 5 years, and that I sort of gained knowledge about how those enormous, what we all think are accounting firms, yes, they do accounting, but they're massive consulting businesses.
Is that role what people would call a spin doctor? Because at the moment they probably need one.
Well, they've had a torrid time of this, haven't they, the last, I suppose, 18 months, 2 years. And I'm sure that they would have employed people that dealt with the media for sure. But I would imagine that they would be outside the organisation. If you need to employ spin, you're probably better off to have a third party do that. If you're doing it from the inside, good luck.
Yeah, absolutely.
And is that similar with the Qantas brand, which sort of self-imploded in an incredibly short period of time to go from something we were enormously proud of to what is almost a basket case in some views? Is that a role you'd like to take on, to go back in there and rebuild that?
Yes, I would. Radio finishes at 8:30, as you know, so there's
plenty of time.
Plenty of hours left in the day. And if Qantas wanted to ask me to give them a hand, not inside. No, you wouldn't work at Qantas, but to sort of be a supplier.
Yeah.
Be a partner on brand rebuild. I mean, look, what I would do, like I always do, is I would default to the ads. I'd just say let's make some good ads. It's probably a bigger task than that, but still, advertising would definitely play a role. As Qantas rebuilds, they will definitely need better advertising.
Just on that, Russell, I'm really speaking from someone viewing from the outside looking in. I know nothing about advertising per se, but if you're not in the organisation and working with their culture, one of you's got to be telling fibs if you're going to come, well, don't worry, you keep doing the crap you're doing, I'll make it look good. Someone's got to be telling porky pies unless you are really, really close together. If you're going to say, I'll fix Qantas, you've got to fix culture. Don't you? And everyone would align with that. So one of the things that you certainly learn in that consulting world, I did, was getting a proposition for the staff. So it's called, an internal organising idea.
Oh, okay, that's flash. I haven't come across that one.
Yeah, so develop your internal organising idea that the organisation, no matter how big or small, everyone can align around the idea. And then brands work at their best where how you express yourself internally is the same as externally. That seems obvious, but not everyone does that.
Yeah, I'm actually doing some work as a consultant, but not consultant, not as in one of the big four type ones, at a rather large Australian bank, and they're in the process of going through and redefining their strategy and redefining their vision under a new CEO. And it really is start with the staff, and if you get the staff bit right, was it Richard Branson or something, or someone who said, you'd get it if you get that bit right, the rest will look after itself?
Well, he probably did say that, I'm sure.
If he didn't, I just did, and I'd like to register that as a trademark.
Well done. And you reminded me of British Airways in about, let's say, 1980. British Airways did when Thatcher was the Prime Minister. So
yep.
1980 is probably right. 1980, 1981. The chair of British Airways was a gentleman called Lord King. And
a bit regal.
Yeah, exactly. And BA... they were going through a bad period, and then they started producing very big, beautiful advertising, and like famous. It was amazing. And Lord King said that the target audience for the ads is in fact the staff.
Yeah.
So whilst the ads were out there in the world, on the telly, etc., he said, no, what we want to do is we want to get everyone aligned internally. So maybe that was the first time I had heard that as a idea, as a strategy, and it definitely worked for British Airways for a period, for sure.
So with advertising, people who make them and sell them love them, and there's a lot of people who see them as a curse or an opportunity to go and make a cup of tea during the TV show. Getting that message across must be getting it for people to warm to the ad, if you like, has got to be the secret to getting a good ad. Is that fair?
Well, yes and no. So some advertisers want to be loved. Other advertisers don't care. It's just repetition.
Yep.
And it sort of depends a bit. Yeah. So it's very hard to make advertising that people stay in their chair, don't make a cup of tea, go to the loo. It's very hard to make that advertising where they just sit there and look at it because they love it. It can be done, and it is often done, and the advertiser is rewarded. This is one of the crazy discussions that you have. Does advertising work? Well, of course it works.
Otherwise, we wouldn't sell any.
Well, one of the most successful Australian ad guys, literally ever, a man called Dave Droger. He now lives in New York. Amazing success story. He said, no one thinks they need advertising until you lose your cat. Which I really love that, right? Because all of a sudden there's a A4 printout of a cat on a tree. Yeah, which of course is an ad. So, and then there's just repetition. So someone like a big retailer, Bunnings Warehouse, is just repetition. Bang, bang, or Chemist Warehouse, bang. They just...
Or any other well-known hardware chain or pharmaceutical outlet, you understand, being a community radio station. Yes.
Well, exactly. So they win through repetition.
Yeah, absolutely.
Russell, like Neil suggested, I've probably turned off a lot these days to ads, but I remember back in the heyday, the Mike Brady's and Mojos of the world, it was about jingle, something that sits tunefully in your mind. We seem to be moving away from that into more visual. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Well, there was an era. There was a jingle era for sure. There's no reason why you could bring them back. You can bring them back, and they would work. It's funny. Only yesterday I was looking at "Don't Argue, Hutton's 40 Franks."
Oh yeah.
With a sort of a view for how could you bring back a jingle like that for Hutton's Footy Franks, but just for another advertiser. There's no reason why you can't keep doing them. It's just off trend in a way, which is a bit weird, isn't it? That even advertising has trends. It shouldn't. It shouldn't really have trends. It should just do what's going to work.
I've just received a text message from someone called Artificial, Russ, and he said if you're looking for jingles, he knows how to write them.
Well, and Artificial is something of a genius.
I'll pass that on to him. He's very, very knowledgeable chap, apparently. Let's talk about your media career, because I would have thought, you've touched base on behind the camera. You already mentioned at Channel 10. When did you get the chance to stand in front of the camera and or behind a radio mic?
Okay, so, well, the Gruen transfer, that's if you can believe that. It's 15 years ago.
What?
Even 16 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I would have believed that. Mm.
Yeah. I got a phone call from the ABC production company that was doing it, called Zapruder's Other Films.
That was Andrew Dent, wasn't it?
That's right, correct, yeah. And I was invited to a test, I suppose, yeah. So I had to go to Sydney, and I sat in a chair on the right of screen. Will Anderson was in the middle, and they said, can you here's a subject. And if I'm remembering this correctly, it was women's sanitary products was the subject. And it's like, talk, start talking. So I started talking in this test. And then, I don't know, a little while later, I just got a phone call, and they said, would you like to be in the TV show? And it's true, I said yes, because if I wasn't sitting there, someone else would be.
Yeah.
And that other person would have been a competitor, because this is 15 years ago. I was running one of the biggest and most successful advertising agencies called George Patterson. If I wasn't there, then it would have been someone from Saatchi & Saatchi or whatever.
Yeah.
So I wasn't desperate to be on telly, but I was desperate to win in my advertising life, and so I said yes. And then, rather interestingly, it was the most successful first show launch since Kath and Kim, and get this, three of the top 5 Gruen shows three of the ABC's top 5 shows are Gruen shows.
Wow.
Yeah. It's a really interesting concept, and I suppose you need to perhaps put the ego aside a bit, because it's funny in that you bring sensibility to what is basically a comedy show, in my opinion, and they seem to take great fun in taking the P155 out of you, but you're bringing logic and sensibility and marketing experience in amongst the funniness. But it works really well, and it's worked well for 15 years.
Yeah, well, Gruen, the show, is at its best. Obviously, Gruen is personified by Will Anderson. And it's at its best when it's cynical and requires advertising to prove itself, and to prove that it's needed.
Yeah.
So the ad guy in the room, what are you doing here? Why should you be sitting at this desk?
Yeah.
And that's the role that I play. And over time, you're right, it has turned, it's a comedy show, 100%. That's what it is. People love it. They still love it. It's still the number 1 show on the ABC, which is pretty amazing. Who would have thunk?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it works really well.
And then someone rang you up and said, I've got an idea. Why don't you get out of bed at 4 o'clock every morning and sit in the studio and talk to people?
Yes. Well, that's pretty much how that happened too. I was asked, would you like to do it? You have to think. You've got to think a decision like that through, don't you?
Mm.
Because it does require a lot of discipline. As you guys know, if you're in media and you've got to be there, for the show it starts at 5:30. Well, you've got to be there, and you've got to be there Monday to Friday.
Russell, it's an interesting concept. My view of it is that it works because it is basically made up as you go along. Neil and I have done this for 4 years. He's organised. He needs to be in control. I just walk in and sit down and start talking when he talks to me, and don't do any preparation. I sense a lot of your show is probably similarly done, and it's successful for that reason, or is that being too disrespectful to the work you put into it?
Well, I think it's a sort of a combo, really. For me, one of the secrets to that show, to 3RW Breakfast, is the rhythm of it. And the rhythm, Monday to Friday, is basically the same.
Yep.
So, and that I think that's a secret sauce. And then, within the rhythm is the content of the day, and the content of the day is provided by the news, but also, most importantly, provided by the listeners. And and as you guys know, the rumour file. The rumour file is amazing. It's an amazing segment
Yes.
for the 7 o'clock news that provides amazing content. Amazing.
Yeah.
Most days there'll be something very interesting that is a rumour. So the show sort of takes from what's going on around town and the world, and then hopefully it gives back as well. And then it sits within a rhythm. So the news of the day is new. The rhythm is same.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, it does, and I think that's probably the highlight of what I mean, because you cannot. I just hate scripted radio, and most of Melbourne breakfast radio is that. But you clearly can't script something at 5:30 in the morning on what might happen in the rumour file because you don't know, but you respond to it because you're able to be flexible enough to make it up as you go along, and that's what I like about the show. It's not locked in; it's spontaneous, and it's good for that reason.
Yes, I agree, and
because our station manager's listening, we don't get to hear 3AW very often, only when we're in Melbourne, because obviously we listen to the breakfast programs on 94.7 The Pulse every morning.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it says at 5:30, there's 5:30 news, and then the green light goes on, and often there really isn't any clue about what's going to come out of one's mouth. In particular, Ross will kick it off, and then away we go.
Hey, Russell, your own skill developed through marketing, creativity, probably thinking on the run a lot. Ross does provide this environment that you need to feed off. Has your history been a huge help to be able to quickly get into that radio rhythm of which you spoke?
Well, I don't. Thank you for saying that. Yes, would be the answer. But I tell you the big difference in radio, in media really, but probably in particular in radio, ideas are disposable. You just chuck them out there.
Yep.
And then move on. Or as Ross will often talk about, it's like tennis. You just go bang. Just playing tennis with ideas or the conversation. Advertising is different in that, yes, it is about ideas, but the idea is often held closely, and it often may take weeks, maybe even months, to see the light of day, if it ever does see the light of day.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you sort of it gives you training with regard to ideas and just idea conversations, which are great. I love those. But it's got a different perspective about ideas. Radio does. Radio is just chuck them out there, which I have to say I love. If I was to say there's no such thing as a bad idea, that's not really right, because there are bad ideas. But if that's your attitude, then you can have some fun.
Yeah, and I think that, despite we're not even, I was going to say, not comparing us to you, we are, but the comparison being that, we walk in here, as Rob said, with very little idea. There was a man who really quite well who said to me once, save it for the wireless. In other words, don't talk about it before you walk in. So Rob knows who we're going to talk to. That's it. And I think if we are prepared to look silly, and we're experts at doing that, we don't need anyone's help to look silly. We can do that fairly frequently once a week. But being prepared to, and again, another Rossism, throw the racket at it, and occasionally you'll hit one. That's what it's all about, I reckon.
No doubt about that. I mean, it's very interesting. Back to Gruen, if we go back to Gruen, when I first was sitting behind that desk, I'd had no experience of being, I'd done a little, being interviewed or whatever, but to actually sit behind a desk and there's cameras and there's an audience, and then Will is to my right, and, in the first few shows, Will isn't talking to me, right? So, and I'm thinking, what's going on here? Well, you then realise what's going on is he doesn't want to talk because he doesn't want to say something that might work on the telly.
Yep.
So you've got to leave. You've got to wait, and wait for the green light to go on, or wait for someone to say you're on, and then go for it. And so you sort of learn. It's one of the things I think you learn. No one tells you that that's what's going on.
Yeah.
It's what's going on. So, and I get it. You got to leave it, or wait. And the other thing, of course, is that as you guys would know, you might miss. There may well be an idea or a comment that comes to you just a bit late.
Yes.
Whilst you're doing radio, like half a beat late. And initially that, you might get a little angry with yourself. It actually doesn't matter, because at another point in time, the same idea will come at the right time.
Which is similar to marketing. I imagine the embryos of really, really good ideas might take months to develop into the final ad that works. Just on that, Russell, what is your absolute favourite something out of nothing in an advertising sense? Go back to your original skill set that turned into something amazing that you look back and think, wow, how did that happen? And whether it's your own idea or an idea in an agency you're working with.
Well, slightly not quite answering the question, but it's always interested me that only once in my advertising life, which was long, was there a script. It was for Stella Artois. Mm-hmm. In 1991. I was working in the UK, and the ad was sort of leaping off a film called Jean de Florette. And as in the Jean de Florette was like the inspiration for the advertising idea. And it's the only time in my ad life where I presented a script and the client said, that's great, let's make it. And then I presented the quote, which was over £1 million. And the client said, no problem, signed the quote. Then I presented, here's how we're going to do the ad. And they said, no worries, it's all approved. Then we went and we shot the ad, we edited the ad. I took the ad down to the client, like the first edit. And the client said, that's brilliant, let's run it. The only time in my ad life where it literally was a hot knife through butter, right?
Yeah.
Mainly, in the main, it's really hard to get good stuff done. And that was the best experience I ever had, where the ad was so perfect, and the idea was perfect, and the execution was perfect, and everyone just kept on saying yes the whole way through. And I've spent a long time since trying to have that experience.
But as the great Russell Morris once said to us, his best song he ever wrote is the next one.
Yeah, exactly. But it is interesting, isn't it, though, if that's your go. Well, it's probably the same for everyone. If you're an architect or musician or ad person, whatever, you do get better at it. There's no question you get better at it.
Well, we've done this 225 times. We're open. There's not a lot of evidence to that extent. Hey, Russ, sorry to have taken some of your Saturday morning to do what you do 5 days a week, but we've been hanging out trying to get hold of you for a while. Thank Mark for us for arranging that when you get a chance. We're going to get him on next year. He doesn't realise yet. But thanks for being part of it. Thanks for helping us to wake up in the mornings, and look forward to chatting to you again somewhere down the track.
Cheers, Rob and Neil. Thank you very much.
Good on you, mate. All the very best.
Artie sends his best.
Good on you, Artie, with your artificial.
And his intelligence. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, Russ.